Aficionado knows that after Packard was going south, they merged with Studebaker. And the car dealership in downtown Hill Valley is a Studebaker dealer. What are the chances, right?
That's pretty deep. Some deep stuff right there. Wow.
I've known Tamir since around 2004. I met him at the DeLorean Car Show in the Garden Spot of America, Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. And he was a fanatic even then. And Tamir, just talk about how long you wanted to make this movie and the process and the insanity that you went through to get it on the screen.
Lots of sleepless nights. Yeah, I mean, so my desire to make the film only started in about 2004 when I came to California to start my film career at UCLA. Before that, it was just a passion, it was just a hobby. From the age of 6, I saw a DeLorean at the gas station, I jumped in, and my mom likes to say that I've never jumped out. I knew this car was going to be important in my life. When I was a teenager, I started building a website about John, and about the car, and the company, the man. And at one point, I cold called John in 1999 and said, I'm going to be in New Jersey and I'd love to come meet you. And he said, sure, come on by the estate. So I came there and we had a nice time talking and catching up about things and talking about cars and all these other things. And from that point on, I sort of befriended him, I befriended Catherine. Catherine was kind of, I think, smitten with the fact that I was building this website, obsessed with her dad. And so at that point, I started to want to try and do a movie when I came into the movie business. And I started shooting my own documentary, but I quickly figured out that that wasn't my specialty. I was good at producing, but not necessarily filming or directing. In 2009, when I was actually doing a narrative project with XYZ Films, which was one of the 4 competing projects at the time, we met the lovely Don and Sheena, who had just come out with The Art of Steel. And the moment I saw that film, I said, these are the 2 people that I need to help me get the DeLorean film made in the right way, in the way they use it.
And if I may interrupt, I highly recommend The Art of Steel. It's a fabulous documentary. It's about the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia and the whole story of Albert Barnes' art collection and how the city establishment of Philadelphia conspired to basically steal all of his art away from him. And the lesson is that if the government wants to fuck with you, they are going to fuck with you.
Which you see in this movie as well. So that's pretty much how the project started, and then so we wanted to do this when we first spoke in 2009, and then it took several years of going back and forth until in 2015, Universal committed to do the international side of it, and then we got IFC Films to do the domestic, and then we sort of went from there.
And Sheena and Don, how much did you guys know about John DeLorean before you hooked up with Tamir?
We probably knew about as much as most people our age, Back to the Future. Thanks, Bob. And I think I don't know if I confused the cocaine stuff. Probably like a lot of people think like he was a cokehead or something. I had everything wrong about John, anything superficial that I knew about him. And then, when we met Tamir in 2009, he really gave us kind of the quick pitch of like the many layers of the story. And that's when it really became very interesting to us. Quick sidebar, because I do have to point this out because it's so amazing. Tamir was filming you did a ton of interviews, when you're like early on. And no, because it's so fucking good. He gave us his hard drive that had all this footage on it, and there's like literally like if I could teach a class on documentary, like 101 What Not to Do. He filmed an interview, a sit-down interview, with a gigantic clock in the background. And I remember looking at him like, what is this? Like, there's no, like, it's almost, it's like it was like the Spinal Tap version of like how you would do an interview. Like, let's frame you. You could have framed the clock out, but you had the clock in the frame. It's this giant clock. So good. Anyway, so but yeah, to answer your question, I knew very little about John's story, and I think we really like like everything in this project. Tamir was the driver of like at every stage, the 15 years of relationships that you had built that really made it incredibly easy for us to interview people because they already trusted you, and by transit of property, trusted us, I guess. But that was huge. I mean, we wouldn't have gotten, the fact that we've gotten the DEA agent and the undercover agents, like, they've never spoken on camera before. Like, Tamir, when he also didn't know when to stop. He's like, I know this guy in Florida who did the ad for the GTO. We're like, yeah, that's never gonna make it into the movie, Tamir. He's like, no, we gotta, you might say something really good. Like, yeah, we gotta draw the line somewhere. We did 55 interviews for this film, and there's only probably 20 interviews in the film, so.
And if you had 5 more minutes of running time, what would you put in the movie?
Well, luckily, we just got the approval to do the Blu-ray, and so we've got lots of bonus features and interviews with people that didn't make it in the film. Yeah. I can start writing down your email addresses for the special limited edition Blu-ray. No, so there's going to be a lot of other interesting stuff that didn't make it in the film, sort of tangential stories that you couldn't fit into an hour and 45 minutes, which is why it's going to be a bonus feature.
Well, so I have to ask you this one, because a lot of people are saying that now is really the golden age of documentaries, because there's so many outlets for them, and there seems to be a much greater appetite for them. And you guys chose to do this story in less than 2 hours, but surely you could make a 4-hour, 5-hour, 6-hour version of this. It could have been a Netflix documentary series. It could have been an HBO two-nighter, 2 hours each night. Why is it this way and not that way?
I would first say that it's not impossible that still can't happen. But why we chose to go this way is we were really fascinated by the idea that there were these competing narrative scripts, and all claimed to have the real story, to know the real John. And we were having these great conversations behind the scenes about, well, who was this man? Why is he still so appealing to Hollywood, and why can't anyone crack the code? And why do all of these people claim to know him better than anyone, and they have the real story, but they have wildly differing versions of who this person is? So we started playing with the idea of using the narrative scenes as a way to frame John, a lens through which we would see him. And we had hoped, and luckily got Alec to play John, and he's also so smart and thoughtful, and we would have the best conversations, again, behind the scenes about what John's motivations were, and Alec would ask some great question that would tie nicely into some moment in John's life. So we thought we should really be shooting behind the scenes, the making of the narrative, and that would be a good way to weave in between the traditional sit-down doc stuff, the archival and sit-down interviews, and then the narrative scenes. But it all kind of comes back to this puzzle of a man. And who was he in this idea of playing with what's truth and what's fact and fiction and what's invention and what's reality?
I thought that device worked very, very, very well. It's normally something you would see in the behind the scenes, and yet doing what I do and knowing what really serious actors do to get into their parts, and how much research they do and how much thinking they do. I thought Alec had a lot of good instincts. Was there a particular moment where you realized, did you always think that you were going to do reenactments? from when you started on this, or did that come as a creative decision later on?
No, well, I'll say this. In 2009, when we first started talking to Tamir about making a documentary, the original idea was to do a documentary companion piece to the narrative film that he was producing. And when that went away, and we were revisiting the idea of just doing the doc, it was always to incorporate the narrative scenes as well. I think once we, like I said, started having these really interesting conversations behind the scenes and got Alec on board, that's when we decided to incorporate behind the scenes footage as well.
So was there anything that you had to cut out of this for legal reasons?
I don't think there's anything we had to cut out for legal reasons. It was time. Like Don said, we did 55 interviews for this.
Oh, well, that's always the case with it. I mean,
Yeah.
you guys probably have a couple hundred hours of footage, right?
Yeah, we did a great interview with Larry Flynn. So hopefully that'll show up on the Blu-ray, DVD extras.
And were there any people that you wanted to interview who turned you down?
I mean, I think the only interview that we don't have in the film is Christina, but she's now being a little open to talking about it a little bit more, which I think is a beautiful.
So we'll interview her tonight.
Yeah, so we're gonna get that interview tonight. We're gonna get some real answers tonight. But she was a friend of the production in the fact that she spoke with Marina and Alec before we shot those scenes, which actually brought a lot of insight into it. And of course, we were able to get wonderful archival that we were able to dig up that I think shed a very accurate and nice light on her relationship with John at the time. So I think even though Christina wasn't in it as an interviewee, I think she was very much in it in the presence of the archival.
When I saw the movie, this is my second time seeing it. I was surprised that there was no reference or interview with Giorgetto Giugiaro. Is there a reason for that?
So Giorgetto Giugiaro is the car designer that actually designed the DeLorean. He also designed the Lotus Esprit and BMW and car. We shot the interview with him actually in Italy, and it's a fantastic interview, and there will be scenes of those on the bonus features. Yeah, but it just couldn't make it. Yeah, we got him. We got him. Another feather in our cap.
Okay. And were there any real surprises that you discovered in the course of your interviews that maybe changed things, changed the way you were going to do this, or you just sort of, your jaw dropped open and you said, shit.
I think Zach was that for us. I mean, we tend to make very personal documentaries, and even when we're taking on kind of biographical subjects, we want to always kind of get a couple layers deeper into that. And I think the way that we started this film, every film has its own journey, and we started this film in the UK actually. We started it in Northern Ireland because there was a thing called Eurofest, which is every 5 years. There's all this DeLorean clubs meet there, and they ride the test track around the actual DeLorean plant, which is still functioning. And that was like a time-sensitive thing, and so we had filmed a lot of the stuff that ends up later in the movie early. So, as is always the case for any documentary, however you start, kind of skews, what the film, how it's shaped and how it's, kind of coming about. And we did start pretty late. We were talking, everybody in the UK and Belfast were all kind of midpoint or much later in the film when John was building the DMC. So it wasn't until much later in the film that we started to get into more of the personal interviews with Catherine and Zach. And that's where it really started, for us anyway, I think it really started to get a lot more interesting and more real, because that really is, I think, what sets this type of film away from just a straight biographical, a lot of information flying at you. But yeah, Zach was definitely, it was a surprise, because he's so raw and he's so still in it, we felt it, and we just wanted to kind of give him a voice. And you know, I think one of the greatest things that came out of that was what became our end, kind of very early on, once we had that moment where Zach basically says how he would like his father's story to end. We just knew at that moment, like, oh, that's the end. So that was really cool.
I have about two or maybe three more questions, and we'll open up to the audience. I found the presence of Bill Collins and Bob Mannion in this to be very, very powerful. And I mean, for me, one of the questions that you ask in the documentary is, you know, when did we know that John was, you know, really shitty? And to me, when you screw your partners, that's about as bad as it gets. What are those guys doing now? What happened? What actually happened to those guys?
Well, Bill actually went on to go make an amazing motorhome company in Michigan. So he landed on his feet did just fine. They all did just fine. I think, you know, the part that is unfortunate, DeLorean people, certain people didn't get recognition that it deserved, and Bill was one of those people that had spent a lot of time, left his career at GM, where he could have also transcended higher up the food chain there, based on his belief in John and what John sold him, which was this dream. And yeah, you know, you see what happens with that, and it does break your heart. And we wanted to bring that emotion out and sort of show that side of John, and that he was a little bit cold and callous when it came to certain business decisions. And yeah, so.
I would just add that I think it's important in getting to know John through the film. It's not just about his decisions, but also the collateral damage that those decisions inflicted, and the stakes, not just his stakes, but the stakes of his decisions, and you know how they affected people like Bill and Bob, but Christina and Catherine and Zach too. You know, this wasn't a man operating in a bubble. I think he, again, as a total outsider, did a great job of compartmentalizing his life. And I have no doubt that he was a very loving and devoted father. That also doesn't mean that he, you know, was not a shady businessman. So that's the thing about people, right? There's just your hero and villain, black and white.
And the relationship with Chapman of Lotus, and these guys obviously conspired to set up the shell company. Did you ever, in your research, get any insight into, did Chapman talk John into this, vice versa? And then, of course, there's a conspiracy theory that Chapman killed himself. So talk about that.
Fake killed himself. Yeah, there's a lot of layers to this, and I'd love to talk with Howard a little bit more about it. I mean, obviously, we omit some aspects in the film just because you cannot have, it's a little labor intensive to go from trial to trial to trial. But there was a trial in between after the drug trial and the one that we showed, the settlement, and that was actually a criminal trial that Howard tried in Detroit, which he was able to get John successfully off of, and that was the federal one, where the government basically said, we know you stole the money.
Some questions.
And then at some point, and I don't want to force anyone, but if you guys want to come up here to answer any questions, no. So, yeah, any questions from the audience?
Yes, sir, right here.
Oh, Christina, come up. Christina Ferrari's coming up. We're going to do a long-anticipated interview.
Just one second. I just want to say one thing. I didn't want to cooperate with the film because I didn't know who Tamir was. I didn't know who this man really is, what a good person he is, what a good soul he has, and how honest he is. I had the pleasure of meeting both of you today, and I've talked to you before. But I just want to say quickly that it's because of Catherine's relationship with Tamir that she cooperated with him. I didn't want to do the film because I didn't want to say anything about my children's father. I wanted to honor his legacy and who he was. Yes, He is who he is, but we had a lovely life together. I had 2 children. I have 3 beautiful grandchildren from it. But that's the only reason why I didn't do it. But I appreciate your friendship with my daughter, how much she loves you. And I want to say everything in this film is correct. There's not one exaggeration, one lie, one thing that doesn't belong in the film. So the next time you're ready to do something, Howard and I, if you want to know the real story, or if you want to add to the story, we would be very happy to cooperate. You are a man of great integrity, and I want to thank you for putting out such a wonderful film. Thank you for great direction.
That was intense. I know. Any other questions from the audience? Back there?
Want me to come up and get it?
No, you can just shout it out.
Okay.
That's really important to me about my father. You see in the movie that I talk about how the car was reclaimed for me by getting to know the DeLorean community, and a big part of that is people like you. I would go to these car shows, and the person who put them on told me it wasn't a successful show unless I cried at least 3 times. And that's because he would introduce me to people who worked for my father, who would tell me stories about what it was like to work for him. And then there was, of course, the people like Tamir that I met, who saw the movie, and then their whole life was built around they successfully make movies because they fell in love with this car. And to me, it began to represent something much bigger. It began to represent a dream for everybody. Every person I talked to had a dream of owning this car. And many of them went on to become millionaires because they learned how to save money when they were children because they wanted this car. So it became this whole new thing for me. And to bring it full circle, as has been mentioned to some of you already, I couldn't, and in the movie, I had to give up my name. It was very hard to live as a DeLorean. And for the first time in my life, I feel like that's all changed. The articles that I see being written about this movie, my father is no longer a cocaine dealer and a criminal. He's a misguided person who made a few mistakes. And so I can never thank the people on this stage enough for what they've done and for giving me
with the Capitals, fictionalized version of the John DeLorean events of the drug bust, told through the POV of Jim Hoffman, the sleazy criminal informant. And what's unfortunate about it, that particular project is exactly what my biggest fear was during the time that I was trying to get our film made, which was the idea that there was going to be more mistruths told about John and his story. And unfortunately, for people that will watch that film and don't watch this film, they're going to come away with it thinking that Jim Hoffman was John's buddy. It's literally being advertised as a buddy comedy about the John DeLorean drug bust. And it is so wildly fictionalized, and everyone can, biopics can be very lenient and cut corners in terms of omitting and doing certain things, but when you take true events and true people's names and then go that far out to the right, personally, and I'm saying this personally, not as a representative of my distributor or anything, I'm offended by it, and I just think it's unfortunate. Now, luckily, our film is coming out first. Their film's coming out in a few months, and that's all I got to say about that.
Tamir's opinions do not necessarily reflect.
Yeah, it's my opinions do not necessarily reflect, especially considering the distributor is also our distributor for international territory.
I would like to say something about the behind the scenes stuff, because I have a little bit of insight that everybody else doesn't. What everybody here may not realize is that the parts that they actually put in and the insights that they put in from Alec really tell some of the story of who my dad was, and you can't get that. most people won't pick up on that because they didn't know him. But I'm telling all of you, pay attention to those when you watch this again, because he's pretty spot on in some of the things that he's a little off in some of the other things, but they offer you insight, and they knew him, so well, he knew him, so he was able to put that in there. So well done.
Thank you.
Someone else?
I think if there's any other questions. Oh, Howard has a trial in the morning, and we're really keeping him up late.
I'll let you know.
The only other people that I wanted to kind of get up here are the writers of the two narrative scenes who are here, Allie Orton and Dan Greeny. We'll get 2 more chairs from you there. Come on up. Grab 2 chairs.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Howard. I look forward to talking to you. And please go see this film, either in your house or at the theaters, and spread the word. Thanks.
John DeLorean.
He's got hot chicks, sports cars, bombed out buildings, Ronald Reagan, FBI agents, hardcore drug dealers.
John DeLorean was the leading man Hollywood producers dream of.
Are you surprised a feature film hasn't been made about your dad?
Yeah.
I'm going to try to be DeLorean.
My dad was at the peak of everything, and then came the car.
You start to see another side of John.
How far would you be willing to go?
You have to play music while everything collapses around him. It's like da na 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 na.
John didn't have the money. We were heading for insolvency.
You did sell your soul.
He is either a beleaguered man or he was the greatest con man to ever come down the pike.